Hello, everyone. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. We got a heavy topic today. It's real bad. I don't know how many other people are going to be here for the talk today, but this is pretty timely with the Oxford High School shooting. So, today we're going to be talking about school shootings as well as like shootings in general. I did not have an outline for today, and part of it was experimental. If I really wanted to, I could have generated one in the last hour just to have some flow as to what direction I want to go. I have a pretty good idea of what needs to be covered throughout this podcast for today. Hopefully, it'll generate some dialogue from your guys' end as well. I think it's a pretty. It's not an interesting perspective. I think the perspectives that are are already out there on social media have already been said. And I don't think there's really a rarity of that kind of perspective that you keep hearing, probably all over social media. So I'm not here to contribute to the same same bird noises that everyone else is doing. I'd rather have something unique to say about the topic. um, I would say in general, school shootings have been like an upcoming. It's not like school shootings were rare. It never felt like school shootings were rare. And I'm a 25-year-old, right? Recently 25. Actually, has it been? No. Oh yeah, I guess it has been. So, yeah, actually on the 25th, so Thanksgiving, I ended up turning 25. Um, yeah, great achievement for me. Yippity doo. Sorry, didn't let anyone know. But yeah, as a 25-year-old looking back throughout the high school, junior high experiences, never seen it was never on my radar that school shootings happened in junior high. It started becoming um, somewhere within my information circle in high school. And it's a one of the neighboring high schools while I was at high school had a school shooting. Um, and it's over very drastic things that people have felt. And so far, I think uh, most of the culprits, shooting culprits, have been guys instead of girls. So that's just another statistic to add on to that. But I think in the next couple generations, it's going to be a massive problem that school shootings need to be addressed. And it's not necessarily school shootings in particular. I think if you've taken a look at the various reasons as to why school shootings happen in the first place, there's a lack of meaningness in what they're doing, so much so that they need to find the meaning in order to compensate for the lack of meaning in their lives. And so the meaningful method that they go about to achieve finding it is through shooting the people that they've been around. And what's awful is pretty often there's this glamorization of, like within high schools, that I don't know, you hear these school shooting stories, and people who are in similar boats might consider that as an opportunity to find new types of meaning. So, what was terrible about this Oxford high school shooting is places where I live in, pretty much like near the Seattle area, maybe about four like schools from what I've heard. They all shut down due to threats. That was actually like following the Oxford high school shooting. Like students were so uncreative to generate a threat out to the school somewhere Well, it's either the same threat and it was met by the four schools with like to take it as a threat, or it was four different threats at four different schools. And that's just, I don't know how you're so uncreative to generate a threat like that. These people aren't even it's clear that they're not out for killing people in particular when they have to announce that there's going to be something coming to that level of maliciousness. That's the part that I don't understand. The way that, I mean, obviously I won't do this, but the way that I would go about, like perhaps like a mass murder, is I'd go in unannounced. I don't know how these people, I don't know what these guys are doing. So it seems to me they want attention and they want to provoke reactions out of people, which is the cruelest way that you can. It's effectively torture. It's like when you go into a torture situation, if you're conducting it, the kind of reaction that you want is the control factor from it, the psychological control factor over a mass group of people, and you're leaving everyone in a terrible psychological state. That's the kind of effect that you'd want to have. Is well, that's effectively what they're doing by generating threats in public areas. So much so that schools need to take action against protecting the students there. And I don't know. It's a hard thing to. If you're the school, what are you supposed to do? You see these threats, and it's your job to make sure that, you know, you keep the students safe. But there's no way to keep the students safe anymore. Imagine if those threats didn't come out, and instead they went from nothing to 100, and they just like started shooting without any indicators before that happening. Someone's gonna do it. There's nothing that you would have been able to do. Something from the Oxford shooting that they went over in a lot of the news networks is they were talking about the social media um, tendencies of the killer. So he had written in like a notebook explaining that life wasn't meaningful anymore and that he was fantasizing over killing people. So they were trying to trace his thought processes as leading up to the event. And they were claiming no one was taking it to the severity that they needed to in order to prevent the actual shooting from happening. But that's such a rough decision to make. Really, the difference between him shooting and not shooting is, oh, it's another depressive kid who needs some help, whatever, doesn't get too much attention. But then there's if you take it a step further and start shooting up a school, you're now branded as someone should be, who everyone should be disgusted with. And absolutely right. I think people should be disgusted with that. But there's a huge transit. Actually, I don't even think there's much of a transition. There's a huge transition act wise between the two. But in terms of where that person's at and making the decision that, oh, I need to find something more meaningful, let's instead bring a gun to school and see how many people I can kill. That's not too much of a difference in terms of psychological um, placement. Transitioning from one to the next isn't that much, especially when you get that low. nothing even matters anymore. And I can speak to experience on that. One thing I did also want to talk about that's a little off related from the heavy topic of it, but it's still heavy. But I was seeing some news outlets trying to generate content with the thumbnail of some of their videos. And what I was pretty disgusted with from those videos was they were trying to clickbait their videos, their content, with what they would think is the most attractive victim who died from the shooting. I don't know how you would. How awful do you have to be to use someone's death as a means to generate the most content or the most traffic as possible? That's really what I took from that, from seeing that. There were 4 people who died. It's like 2 guys and 2 girls. And there was clearly like a really good, like a attractive, like 17-year-old. And comparably, the other ones weren't as like attractive. But they purposefully chose the most social media characteristic characteristic person to choose that would generate the most like traffic just for their traffic gain on their media or on that media. I find that disgusting. Shame on whatever news network did that. I'm not going to go look them up, but you know what's sad is when I'm pretty sure there's different instances where people try to go for the thumbnail that brings in the most clicks. But these are dead people that we're talking about. Shame. Imagine being a parent and knowing that there's school shootings out. And you could say, well, statistically, what are the odds that my child would have to go through a school shooting during their time? Are those really odds that you even want to roll? The more you believe that your odds are mean that you're like immune to the situation, I think the more unhappy you're going to be that you didn't have more control over it. So as a parent, if I were to, well, first things first, from the parent's perspective of the shooter, I'm pretty sure when your child is going through something as poor as that, say if you have a child that's like severely depressed and has a lack of motivation or meaning in their life, Pretty sure, from my understanding, from how my parents operate with me, pretty sure the job of the parent is to convince me that life is meaningful or is worth living with the conditions that I've been brought into. That's like the biggest role that they have as parents. And so I consider that to be my own role when I'm considering being a parent myself. It's not even if I believe that life is worth living. It's, can I convince my child that life is worth living by giving them the best experience that I can give them. So, from the parents' perspective of the shooter, they've clearly failed that. And they, once they start realizing that they've been failing that role, and it's not like, I don't even think either of them took it seriously anyways. It didn't sound like either of them really cared to the kind of duty that they were responsible for when having a child. Not like everyone sees it the same way I do, but, you know, from my perspective, they failed that role very hard. From this perspective of the victims' families and the victims' parents, it's like, are you really going to leave the perhaps the life of your kid with the institution that you're putting them in and the environment with the like surrounding kids in it too? Is that there's a lot of dice to roll with how bad things would go between those different dimensions of which dictate your kid's safety in the environment. And it's just, there was responsibility on the victim, there was responsibility on this institution. The parents failed. So many things went wrong to lead up to the event. So as a parent, do you let those odds roll out and have, like, I don't know, a different as long as you're not the victim, are you are you gonna, in pursuit of not being the victim, how many factors are you willing to control for your child? And I think like public school is such it's a fundamental thing in American education. It's like public school is seemingly free. It really isn't, but it's accessible to everyone. Do you just go private school then? Or do you do homeschooled? What would be the best way to give your child meaning? What's sad about public schools is that, or what's sad at that, about like some of those other alternatives, is private school actually costs a bunch of money. Public school, I feel like I've gotten a better social interaction or like a social network from attending those. And then when you're homeschooled, you're really missing out on any social interaction outside of the family institution. So, and if you're looking for the best experience to give for your child, you have to weigh out each of those. If they're homeschooled, well, at least they're alive, and there's no chance that like a school shooting would happen. But at the expense of, they don't get the social skills needed in order to operate as a normal person. There's so many experiences to be had with the kind of network that you have accessible at your public school. There's a lot of experiences to be had. I don't know if there's one thing that I've been talking about between my friends, and I think this is the third time I'm going to be saying this, so they can not hear this portion if they don't want to. But I've said several times that like school shooting has been it in terms of malicious activity from someone who can't find meaning. School shooting has been like a primary go-to method, like last resort method. It's like a first choice last resort method. And one of these days someone's going to be creative enough to not do that. And what schools should be looking out for are for people who have the creative well, no. Schools should be schools should be wary of, or rather just aware of, the kinds of opportunities that people would capitalize on to in pursuit of harm. And I imagine that school shootings is like it's definitely a destructive method, but it's not the most destructive method. And so far I don't think there's very many methods that have been capitalized on yet. I think there's bombings out there. Um, and that would be like a step up, I suppose, from school shooting. I don't know what other kinds of acts of terrorism would be considered by people who are at that low point. But I think a school needs to be prepared for the various methods of destruction that are currently out there and will be there in the future. And take those seriously as well. Can you really blame the institution for not being prepared enough to prevent the situation from happening? Absolutely. But it's hard to know when someone will. Okay, in terms of like depression and whatnot. When you're an institution and you know the situation of a student who is clearly going through like motivational problems or just problems in general, lack of meaning problems. By all accounts, like a teacher should have okay, in terms of like the Oxford high school shooting, I think there was a teacher who saw something in the killer's notebook that there was an association between a lack of meaning and shooting people for meaning. The second they saw that, he should have been expelled. The second they saw that, like police officers should have taken him into custody. So the I don't know. The institution almost had it right. It's just that one person didn't take it far enough. Maybe needed to distribute the data to someone who would know what to do with it. There should be like, I think every school department should have, or like a school board should have like a mental health professional. One who evaluates the serious situations of certain students. And I think if that person was referenced, they would know what to do, or they would have like a better idea of what to do for that specific case. It's pretty rough to talk about. Now, frankly, I don't think there's much more for me to say. I think I got through like the bulk of what I wanted to talk about for that. But I think, oh no, not actually. There's one more thing, and maybe I shouldn't say that. There's another thing I want to talk about. I just remembered it. But so far, social media, political sides have been speaking on behalf of the gun ownership and like gun reform. So from I think a more leftist point of view, the majority of that population have been believing that gun reform would have prevented those people from getting a gun. And the methods that were exposed in order to allow the situation to happen. I just don't think gun reform was the right play there. I think if you really want to take out the root problem, and the reason why I mentioned the different extremities of terrorism that someone could take up, and that you should be looking out for that, is because if you start doing gun reform, then people are going to have to find new creative ways to be destructive. So, but the real problem is that the shooter in the Oxford High School situation, they were lacking meaning, and they were pretty much at the end of their I don't know. They've had enough with lacking in meaning, and so they tried something drastic, and that was to bring a gun to school. But say if the gun wasn't there, what kind of other drastic options would that person have? Well, if you need them to get creative, I'm sure they could. And frankly, I don't want to find out how creative a person can get if they need a substitute for school shooting. So really the answer here is to figure out how to handle these people or these kinds of people or provide them meaning in a better way. So much so that they can realize that their conditions are worth living for. And that's, I don't know, whose job is to do that if the parents won't take it up? Someone needs to step up, but no one's willing to take the responsibility. And I feel like that we're talking about like a very minority case here, like such a anomaly case where the extremities of everything going wrong are so slim that it's like not even it's hardly worth it to keep it's hardly worth it to fix the system to get something running in place or to make like the system better. But eventually people are going to be so fed up with school shootings that they feel the need to make the changes necessary to the institution. But I think if they really wanted to solve the problem instead of gun reform, because of that, I'm gonna be honest. I think a kid bringing a gun into school is probably a better option of what could possibly be out there. I don't think it's a good option. In fact, I think it could cause a lot more harm than what students have like already suffered through, or like schools have already suffered through. But there needs to be some lookout for other creative methods that people might go to lengths for, just to cause the same destructive harm. You put someone in the position where they don't think life is isn't meaningful anymore, and they're trying to experiment with what kinds of destructive acts they can do. You don't want to know how bad they're gonna try and achieve what they believe could be meaningful, especially when it's all malicious intent related. One more thing, and then I think I'll close up. So one of the posts that the killer made um, before the shooting happened, he posted on social media that actually two more things. There's two more things I want to talk about, but the first one being the post on social media about the gun that they had. So what they what he ended up getting was like an early Christmas present, and it was a gun that he clearly wanted, and so he was flaunting it on social media, saying such a beauty, whatnot. That was one of the very rare moments that the news portrayed of him having like some kind of meaning or some kind of happiness from like life's experiences, which as a parent, what do you do? It's like if your job is to provide like your child meaning, and if that's the way to show them life is worth living, is that really a good thing or a bad thing if it's a gun? You know? I mean, clearly you need to make the choice that this person who is struggling to find meaning can find meaning through guns and can responsibly use guns. That's a big implication to make about that. I'm pretty sure 17-year-olds can't have guns anyways, or like 15-year olds. I don't know how old the killer was. I think it might be 15. I think it's on the younger end. But was that them doing their job right? I don't think so. There's plenty of other ways to find meaning in life rather than just consumption. I think if they wanted to give their kid responsibility through production responsibility, they could totally do that. So from the producing role, can this person fulfill like a job and find meaning in life through that? Is there other consumption or other consumer products that, or are there other products that like my kid can find meaning through consumption with, rather than something that requires a lot of responsibility to handle, you know? It's really bad when, yeah, yeah. I'm just gonna stop it there. It's like, it's no, actually, I'm not gonna stop it there. It's really bad when this kid is not talking about anything, or rather, is saying that everything is not meaningful, and then the second he brings up and like shares something meaningful to him over social media, it's about a gun. I don't know. That's all I wanted to say on that. The second point I was going to bring up is how the media is tracing all this social media from, or like the different sources that led up to the indication that this person was going to do something bad. Now people weren't taking the signs properly. The problem with that though is, say if you have someone who's bundling it all up and then is waiting to blow up. In terms of my own depression, or rather from my depression experience, I didn't let anything out. And when I did, it wasn't like recorded anywhere. As someone who doesn't use social media or write stuff down, I mean, I do some writing now and then now, but back then I didn't. Say if you have someone who's not giving any indication as to something as malicious as that, what do you do? As a news source, how do you give people, I don't know. I feel like the way that the news was portraying the school shooting and the signs that were leading up to it, they're all they're all situational to understanding how like the killer went through psychologically leading up to the shooting. But not everybody has those same signs. And some people don't have signs at all, or to what like the news considers to be signs. It's pretty obvious when you have someone writing stuff down in a notebook that life is meaningless and then proceeds to draw like a gun shooting two people. Those are pretty obvious signs, but what are you going to cover when the person has no indication? How is the school going to be able to manage someone who doesn't have any indication of having malicious intent? How do you do that as a parent? All these people in this situation believe that there were many preventable, there were many individuals out there who had the responsibility to prevent this from happening. But if you never interpret those actions correctly, then they're like should be held equally responsible from the shooting or for the shooting happening. The problem is though is what if someone gives no actions for anyone to interpret? Then I think everyone's in a panic mode, because now you really don't have control over any of the dimensions from preventing someone from doing something as bad as a school shooting or a shooting in general. So those were like the last two things I wanted to highlight, but it's a tough topic. No, I think I'm going to call it there. Thank you guys for listening. I'll see you guys next week.